Hi, boys and girls. I am about to read Chapter 2 of Louisiana's Way Home by Kate DiCamillo with the permission of Candlewick Press, the publisher. Chapter 2, here we go. This is what happened. We stood on the side of the road in Georgia, just past the Florida-Georgia state line, which is not at all in any way a line, yet people insist that it exists. Think about that. Granny turned to me and said, "All will be well." I said, "I don't believe you." I refused to look at her. We were both quiet for a very long time. 3 semis drove past us. One was painted with a picture of a cow standing in a field of green grass. I was jealous of that cow because she was home and I was not. It seemed like a very sad thing to be jealous of a fake cow on the side of a truck. I must warn you that a great deal of this story is extremely sad. When the 3rd semi blew past us without even slowing down, Granny said, "I am only attending to your best interests." Well, what was in my best interests was being with Ramey Clark and Beverly Topinski. Ramey and Beverly were my friends of my heart. They had been my best friends for 2 solid years. I could not survive without them. I couldn't. It just wasn't possible. So what I said to Granny was, "I want to go home. Being with Archie is in my best interest. Ramey and Beverly and Buddy the one-eyed dog are in my best interests. You don't understand anything about my best interests." "Now is not the time," said Granny. This conversation is inopportune. I feel extremely unwell. I am persevering, as you should." Well, I didn't care about that Granny felt extremely unwell. I was tired of persevering. I crossed my arms over my chest. I stared down at the ground. There were a lot of ants running around on the side of the highway, looking very busy and pleased with themselves. Why would ants choose to live on the side of a highway where they're just going to get run over by cars and semis on a regular basis? Since I was not talking to Granny, there was no one in the world for me to ask this question of. It was a very lonely feeling. And then an old man in a pickup truck stopped. The old man in the pickup truck was named George Luttrell. He rolled down his window and raised his cap off his head and said, "Howdy, I'm George Luttrell." I smiled at him. It's best to smile. That's what Granny has told me my whole life. If you have to choose between smiling and not smiling, choose smiling. It fools people for a short time, and it gives you the advantage, according to Granny. "Now, what are you 2 lovely ladies doing on the side of the road?" said George Luttrell. "Good morning, George Luttrell," said Granny. "It seems we've miscalculated and run entirely out of gasoline." She smiled a very large smile, using all of her teeth. "Miscalculated," said George Luttrell. "Run entirely out of gasoline? My gracious." "Could we impose upon you for a ride to the nearest gas station and back again?" said Granny. "You could impose upon me," said George Luttrell. I considered not imposing upon George Luttrell because the truth is, in addition to being tired of persevering, I was also tired of imposing. Granny and I were always imposing on people. That's how we got by. We imposed, and we borrowed. Sometimes we stole. I considered not getting into the truck. I considered running down the highway back to Florida. But I did not think that I would be able to run fast enough. I've never been able to run fast enough. And by that I mean, no matter where I go, Granny seems to find me. Is that fate? Destiny? The power of Granny? I don't know. I got in the truck. The inside of George Luttrell's truck smelled like tobacco and phenol. The seat was ripped up and the stuffing was coming out of it in places. "We certainly do appreciate this," George Luttrell said, Granny. Once somebody told Granny what their name was, she never lost a chance to use it. She said that people like to hear the sound of their own names above and beyond any other sound in the world, and said it was scientifically proven. I doubted it very seriously. I sat in George Luttrell's truck and I picked the stuffing coming out of the seat, and then I threw little pieces of the stuffing fluff out the window. "Stop that, Louisiana," said Granny, but I didn't stop. I threw the pieces of the truck stuffing out of the window, and I thought about the people and animals I had left behind. Ramie Clark, who had loved to read and listen to all my stories. Beverly Topinski, who was afraid of nothing and was very good at picking locks. And then there was Archie, who was king of the cats, and Buddy, the one-eyed dog, who was also known as the dog of our hearts. What if I never got a chance to say those names again? What if I was destined to never again stand in front of those people and that cat and dog and say their names out loud to them? It was a tragic thought. I threw more stuffing from George Luttrell's truck out the window. The stuffing looked like snow flying through the air if you squinted really hard. George Luttrell took us to the gas station called Vic's Value. Granny started the work of talking Mr. Luttrell into pumping some of the gas into a can for her and also making him pay for what he pumped. Since I had no desire to witness her efforts to get the gas that would only take me farther from my home and friends, I walked away from the two of them and went inside Vic's Value, where it smelled like motor oil and dirt. There was a tall counter and a cash register on it. Next to the cash register, there was a rack full of bags of salted peanuts. Even though my heart was broken and I was filled with the most terrible despair, my goodness, I was hungry. I stared very hard at those little bags of peanuts. The man behind the counter was sitting on a chair that had wheels. When he saw me, he came out from behind the counter like a spider, moving his feet back and forth and back and forth. The chair made a squeaky, exasperated noise as it rolled toward me. "How do you do?" I said, and I smiled, using all my teeth. "My granny's outside getting some gasoline." The man turned his head and looked at Granny and looked at George Luttrell. Then he looked back at me. "Yep," he said. I considered him. He had a lot of hair in his nose. "How much are your peanuts?" I said. I said this even though I did not have any money at all. Granny always said, "Ask the price exactly as if you intend to pay." The man didn't answer me. "Are you Vic?" I said. "Could be." "I'm Louisiana Elefante." "Yep," he said. He took a yellow spotted handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped it across his forehead. His hands were almost entirely black with grease. I said, "I have been made to leave my home against my will." "That right there is the story of the world," said Vic. "It is?" I said. "Yep." "I hate it." I said, "I have friends at home." Vic nodded. He folded his spotted handkerchief up into a neat square and put it back in his pocket. "You can take as many of those little bags of peanuts as you want to," he said. He nodded in the direction of the peanut rack. "Free of charge," he said, and then he rolled himself back around the counter. Well, this was the only good thing that had happened to me since Granny woke me up at 3 a.m. and told me that the day of reckoning had arrived. In some ways, this was a story of woe and confusion, but it's also a story of joy and kindness and free peanuts. "Thank you," I said. I helped myself to 14 bags. Vic smiled at me the whole time I was taking the peanuts from the rack. There is goodness in many hearts, in most hearts, some hearts. I love peanuts.